So just a little bit of background. The city of Bloomington participated in a bond markets and racial equity project that was funded by the Public Finance Initiative. So I think we were one of the first cohorts involved in that. And basically the focus of that program was to just identify factors in our municipal bond issuance that could create progress towards equity. And there were sort of two sides of the project. There was definitely the municipal bonding legal language side, and then there was a GIS component. And for my involvement, I was just solely focused on the GIS side. So my knowledge of the entire project as a whole is limited if people have specific questions. So as I mentioned, we use the social equity analysis solution for the project. I don't know if anyone has used it before. There is a great blog post that kind of steps you through everything. There's also a Esri video floating around that I found to be more helpful. The solution documentation is brief, and I did not find it helpful at all, so I kind of had to do some experimentation and digging on my own. And I will note that there was a recent update in November 2023, and I utilized the solution before that. So there's another disclaimer for you. If you are not familiar with solutions, basically you click a button to deploy the solution, and then it magically appears in your content. So it creates a folder for you and drops all the necessary items. I will say the social equity analysis solution is probably the cleanest. I know some out there release a bunch of bloat. So the main piece for this solution is this desktop application template, and that is where you will run all your analyses. So if we take a look at that template here, pretty bland when you first open it, but really if you want to implement the solution, you'll be relying on the tasks associated with that pro project. So they're available right here. There are also tools or a toolbox with different models. So if you're working through it, I suggest using the tasks. And then when you feel more comfortable, you can really use the tools and tweak your analysis. So because I wasn't able to find a lot of documentation, I had to do a lot of trial and error. And I thought it would be helpful if I just kind of defined some of these tasks if they are not obvious to you. Evaluate conditions and actions will allow you to plug in some of your community assets and identify certain areas in your community that you're focusing on. So a potential use for the solution would be if your city wants to host a summer free lunch program at select locations within the neighborhoods of your city or county, but you want to find more areas to offer those free lunch programs, the solution can help you really focus in on the community characteristics that you're hoping to provide those free lunches to. So maybe it's, areas of a high population of children, or maybe low income or minorities. There's a bunch of different ways you can slice and dice that demographic data. So that a community asset would be, for example, the lunch locations, and then the condition would be enriching your study area with demographic data. So if your study area were the neighborhoods where you want to offer the free lunch program, you would use the task to enrich demographic data to your study area. And I will offer the disclaimer that it does use credits, and I definitely wanted to avoid using credits, but the tools are a really nice option. I can see I'm not signed in, so that would perhaps prohibit us from looking at that tool. Sorry. Okay. So if you did want to just use that Esri demographic data, and this doesn't load, we'll move on. But like I said, use credits. There are just some standard demographics that the tool suggests for you, but you are able to pick and choose more from the Esri provided information. So there's a lot of stuff there. If you're like me and you always find ways to avoid using credits, this can be done if you download your own demographic data. If you're interested in census blocks and your demographic data is census blocks, then you're good to go. Don't have to use this tool at all. And the task will let you kind of skip through stuff. If your demographic data is coming from multiple sources, so say census and EPA environmental justice data, you will have to combine it into one data set. If your study areas are not the same as your demographic data, so say you're looking at neighborhoods, but your demographic data is for census blocks, you can use the apportion polygon tool. And the tool documentation does explain how it is different than the enrich tool. And again, I can send a link out to that tool after this. And one other thing, being in the land of 10,000 lakes, the apportion polygon tool does rely on area calculations. So just be sure to cut out any water if you do have significant water bodies in your study areas. Identify community characteristics lets you build a composite index of all those demographics you're interested in, and I'll show you an example of that. And then create an equity analysis index takes the demographic composite index that you create and then allows you to calculate the rate at which assets occur. So again, if you are looking for free lunch programs, it would help you identify areas of greatest need or the areas that have your preferred community characteristics with low or no assets. So with that very brief crash course in the social equity analysis, I'll show you a few examples that we ran and kind of where we stopped. So the first attempt we ran here at the city was basically looking at minority populations, population of children, and households with food stamps. So here we have our park boundaries just kind of overlaid on our map. Those are the gray areas. And then this is our composite index that we calculated using the tool or the solution. So if you click on a specific polygon, the range or like the composite index range was 1. So those are areas of highest focus versus 85 lowest focus. So if I wanted to host a summer lunch program at a park and I'm hoping to serve a community that has a high population of minorities, children, and people using food stamps, I might choose to focus my efforts over on the east side of Bloomington here. So this was a great first start for us, but one of the goals of our participation in the grant program was to really focus on parks themselves and the people visiting those parks, not necessarily looking at the city as a whole. So that really presented a challenge for us and required us to be creative. So this is a little bit of some rogue GIS analysis that I did, but it worked. So like I said, our focus was on city parks. So that's these areas. Because our target community we thought would probably be within a quarter mile. We buffered all those parks by a quarter mile, which resulted in a pretty messy data set here. And it's not visible in these buffers, but I did clip out water. So before when I mentioned, yeah, we got rid of water just so that way we could focus on the area calculation when we used the apportion polygons. Using those buffers, I selected demographics and plugged them into our create community composite index. And I can turn off the base map here. It might be a little bit easier to see. And then for cartographic purposes, I joined that data back to our parks. So we were really able to focus on the community that is around each park rather than the whole entire city. So it took us a bit to get to that point, but the result was pretty good. So, we can adjust demographics based on what communities we're hoping to target, but with this park-based analysis, we're able to focus on parks themselves. So we might try to release some like bonding opportunities over, for this park right here. It has a pretty high focus rank score. So it was pretty interesting to test this solution and kind of walk through stuff. I will say, looking at the tasks, we basically stopped right here at this point, identifying community characteristics. The further tasks beyond that are really focusing on assets. And with this particular project, we weren't looking to locate new parks by any means. We were more just focused on the communities surrounding the parks and kind of the improving the assets that are already at the park. So I think, going forward with other departments, we'll kind of look at implementing the solution as a whole and taking it one step further. Fun to use. Like I said, there are definitely ways to avoid credits if that is of interest to you. But fun. I'm not a demographic expert by any means, but that is really all I have. I know it was a lot. I will send out kind of some notes after this for you to reference if you want. But otherwise, available for questions if anyone has any.
That was awesome. I think every geographer should get a t-shirt that says, "I'm not a demographer, but I play one at work." Because we just end up doing it,
agree.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is super. I put this in the chat. So do I understand correctly that what I'm looking at for these parks here is those demographics or the scores are actually for a quarter mile around the parks, right?
Correct. Yep. And then just for cartographic appearance, I joined those rankings to our park boundaries.
That's so clever.
So you didn't wind up with that whole like blobby mess. Yeah.
No, I love that because you still get it across of like, here's the park but it's symbolized by the area around the park. That's so cool. I'm so glad this is recorded because I'm absolutely going to go through this for Brooklyn Park. This is really, really cool.
Well, and I don't know that I created any science behind it, but just looking at the index where parks overlap isn't quite gonna hit home since people don't live in parks necessarily. So
well, I think from the storytelling perspective, like if I was not a GIS person, this is so much easier to interpret is like, well, that's the park. Here's the index for that park versus, well, here's the area. Yeah, I completely agree that the blobs around it are like, what's going on? So I even think about that with like this type of way to represent data for doing like drive time areas and stuff that can look really crazy. Like, very cool. So I agree. Yeah, I agree with the Esri solution. This was great too because it made me think again about Esri solutions because I feel like in my mind I usually think about them as like apps, right, and not necessarily like tools. So that's a good reminder to me. That's not every solution is just a web app builder app, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, my question I had was just as you were going through this data, did you have any just like big either aha moments where like you combined some demographics and were like, whoa, like I didn't even think about the connection between those, or vice versa, any moments where you really thought like something was going to come out as like, wow, it's a really strong relationship or something that just didn't pan out?
Not necessarily. I think the people that I worked with did kind of have some great ideas looking at like, number of public transit stops
Mhm.
within the quarter-mile buffer, right? So are parks easy to access if you don't have a car, but you necessarily don't want to walk? Um, so I think
Hmm.
there is a potential to incorporate a lot of numbers and demographics into the analysis. It doesn't have to be a minority population. It doesn't have to be income.
Yeah.
We're working on a asset project right now, calculating the condition rating of every bench in our park system. So that's something that we could incorporate too.
Hmm.